the Star of Rock Murders. I'm your host, Andy Hale. I've got my trusty sidekick here, Whitney Braun. We're recording this on Sunday, November 24th. Whitney, it has been a long road coming, hasn't it?
It really has. And I'm not going to lie, there were times I didn't think we were going to get to this conversation. There were times I wasn't sure this was going to happen. So I'm really happy to be here right now.
Yeah, and so let me first welcome all of our listeners and supporters. And I also want to welcome the Will County State's Attorney's Office. I know they listen to the podcast. They secretly listen, I think, but I know that they listen. So welcome, Will County. You can join us too. So welcome to everybody. So for those who don't know, we had a huge development Friday, just 2 days ago in court. The judge ruled, Will County had brought a motion to dismiss our post-conviction petition, basically saying a lot of different things, that our evidence either was not new, it was not material, meaning like it wasn't important, and that even some things that I thought were kind of silly, like our allegations all, contradicted each other, so they should be ignored. And the judge basically went through the evidence kind of piece by piece at the hearing Friday. And basically, a lot of our evidence, I think the bulk of our evidence, he has permitted to advance to the third stage, the final stage, which is an evidentiary hearing. So he denied the motion to dismiss for all those pieces of evidence that we're going to walk through now. So we get to the final stage. We are knocking on the doors of justice, and I'm still kind of on cloud nine. It's still kind of surreal.
It is. I mean, just think about this. I mean, March, it's going to be 65 years since the crimes. And how many other cases ever get to a point where just shy of the 65-year anniversary, there is actually hope of arriving at some form of truth?
65-year anniversary, and Chester Weger's still alive. And
Still alive.
the reason I said this to him and his family on Friday, I think, the reason he's still here with us is because he's on this quest for justice.
Yeah.
He's outlived, most people involved in the case, and he is so committed and determined to get the result that we're all fighting for. It's incredible. Like I said, I got interviewed outside of court, and I said, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm excited. I'm exhilarated for the opportunity. Finally, we get the opportunity to present all our evidence in a court of law, and the judge then will basically decide whether we've met our burden, which is essentially whether this new evidence, when combined with the old evidence, would probably change the trial result. And I think when we go through it here, I think it's an overwhelming yes, it would.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the third stage. The Post-Conviction Hearing Act has 3 stages. This is the third and final stage. And I can't tell you, like I said, I can't overstate how excited I am on behalf of Chester and his family for this opportunity.
Did you have like a moment where, like, you were just completely clenched before going into the courthouse, where you're like, what if all of this goes wrong? Or did you like walk in with utter confidence?
I was driving down there. My son Hayden came with me, and on the way down, as we got closer, I said, we're going to win or lose today, and
Yeah.
if it hit me like, the judge could dismiss the whole thing today. It could all be over, which means we could still appeal, but that's like a 2-year process. We don't have 2 years.
Right.
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 I said, we need to win today. And yeah, there were moments like that where you're just being realistic. I mean, it's as much as I've been confident because of the strength of our evidence, I just know it's a very kind of a hot potato case, and it's complicated, and I don't take anything for granted,
Right.
And it's just hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I can't even tell you like how excited we all were and still are and still
Yeah.
are to get this hearing. So basically, to kind of explain to people, when I say evidentiary hearing, it's basically a trial. It's like a bench trial, meaning we get to put on our evidence that the judge has allowed, in court. So we get to call certain, witnesses live if we want. We get to introduce certain documents and forensic results. Will County will get a chance to cross-examine those witnesses, make objections, and then that, we might not. It might take more than a day. It probably will.
Mhm.
At the end of that hearing, the judge will rule, maybe not right on the spot, but the judge will ultimately rule whether we met our burden of showing, like I said, that the new evidence would probably change the trial result. And if we meet that burden, then the conviction's vacated. And that's what we're looking for, an exoneration. So you want to walk through kind of where we're at in terms of the evidence?
I really do. I really want to walk through it with you. And I think the listeners, I'm sure, are going to be really curious what was allowed in and what has been tossed out, and what's the rationale behind them.
Yeah, so I made a list, and I think I got this right going by, because I'm going to post on the podcast website, andyhalepodcast.com. Give me a couple days, but I'm going to post the judge's order so everybody can
Mhm.
read it. And he made reference to certain exhibits that he's permitting to advance to the third stage when I went back to my binder. Basically, the linchpin of his opinion was the testimony of Roy Tyson. Roy
Mhm.
Tyson was the guy that reached out to me, said that he was friends with Smokey Rona when Smokey Rona was, much, older guy.
Yeah.
Smokey told him essentially that one of the husbands wanted his wife killed, enlisted the Chicago Mafia to do it. And, we took a sworn statement from him. Gosh, probably took about an hour and a half for him to tell the
Mhm.
story. And the judge found that that was sufficient, to get to the third stage. It was could potentially be indicative of Chester's innocence. Now, at the second stage, the court was not allowed to make credibility determinations. Here at the third stage, the court can weigh the credibility of witnesses. I'm confident that all our witnesses are going to come off as credible. Um,
Mhm.
Hearsay is allowed. So the court said that the Roy Tyson's testimony will be permissible. And then the court basically said there's a lot of other evidence that kind of could potentially corroborate that or kind of go hand in hand with that he's allowing in. And I'll first go through the list and then we can kind of break it down. I'll go through
Yeah.
the orders because in the opinion, he just goes by exhibit numbers. He said exhibit 2, which is a report about when the women's watches stopped working. Exhibit 6, which was handwritten notes from a meeting with the crime lab, shortly
Mhm.
after the murders. Exhibit 8, which was the report of our forensic, um, uh, pathologist,
Yeah. Mhm.
David Fowler, and Exhibit 10, which the autopsy reports. Exhibit 12, which was Chester Weger's interviews back in March of 1960. Exhibit 14, which was a state's attorney interview back in the day with a woman named Victoria Hobneck, who worked at the lodge and said she didn't see any scratches on Chester. Exhibit 17, which was the Washington University Medical School
Mhm.
report on that hair that was tested that they found to be dissimilar to Chester. Exhibit 18, the Bodie lab report of the DNA result, where it was the hair on Francis Murphy that they tested,
Mhm.
came back to a male profile, not Chester Weger. Exhibit 20, the Roy Tyson statement. Exhibit 22, the telephone operator interview, Lois Zelensek.
Mhm.
Exhibit 26, the testimony, the statement I took of Marcia Minot, who was the daughter of Lois Zelensek. Exhibit 27, the statement I took from a woman named Gladys Brummel, who was the woman that Lois Zelensek reported this to. She's still alive. Exhibit 28, the statement from Mrs. Smith, I'm keeping her name confidential for now,
Mhm.
who reached out to me and said her grandfather told her that he was in well, she knew he was in the Chicago Mafia, that
Yeah.
one of the husbands wanted his wife killed, and he picked the guys who went down there to do it. Exhibit 29, the attorney she worked for at one point, where she told this story to him, you know, years and years ago. Exhibit 30, the 1960 Illinois State Police interview of Glenn Palmatier. That was part of those Steve Stout documents, which we got. Exhibit 33, also part of the Steve Stout documents. It's when Illinois State Trooper Donald Murphy gave a statement where he talked about, he was talking to Glenn Palmatier when they were waiting for the meeting to start, and Palmatier said he knew Robert Murphy, the husband of Frances
Yeah.
Murphy.
Yeah.
Exhibit 42, which was a tree expert report from back in the day where Harlan Warren and Dummett got a tree expert who basically said the log didn't come from a tree in St. Louis Canyon. Exhibit 49, the guy named James Woods we took a statement from, whose dad was good friends with Wayne Hess, who said he overheard Wayne Hess say to his dad, what we did to Chester Weger essentially wasn't right.
Right.
Exhibit 53, Chester Weger's polygraph reports. 53 and 54 are all the polygraph reports that Chester passed, initially with the Illinois State Police. Exhibit 57, which is the polygraph reports of the Palmatier brothers, where they allegedly passed their test. Exhibit 58, Lois Zelensek's polygraph report, where she allegedly failed her test. Exhibit 29, which was kind of a Twine report. Exhibit 63, which is an interview with George Spiros, where he talked about seeing 2 cars and 5 men near the women. Then the Randy Reynolds statement, which is a huge one, where he was at Dummett's retirement party, and he said
the infamous boast.
Chester Weger was innocent, but I got him to confess. And then last but not least, and probably the most important, the Othram report on genetic genealogy that found that the hair on Frances Murphy, the same hair that was tested for DNA, originated from one of those 3 Bray brothers. So that all that evidence is coming in. So let's kind of first start with that. And I just think when you look at that collectively, which you have to, it makes an overwhelming case that would it have changed the trial result if the jury heard all of that? And let's start with this. The case against Chester Weger was weak. I said this in my response to the state's motion to dismiss. It was weak. There was no forensic evidence tying Chester to the crime. There were no witnesses tying him to the crime. It was just his, air quotes, confession that he recanted as soon as he was given a public defender. And all this evidence, that I just went through, if the jury heard that, that to me would probably change the trial result.
I mean, I sometimes talk about this case with, friends at dinner parties, and my day job is teaching at a university, and I'll talk about this sometimes in the hypothetical with my students, and I'll throw out these hypothetical scenarios, and every time I do, my students, who are granted people in their 20s living in 2024, will always go, well, of course you got to throw out, right, that conviction. It's just so overwhelming. And I have to think that we haven't changed so much as a society in 65 years that reasonable people 65 years ago, when presented with the same fact pattern that you're going over now, wouldn't react the same. Wouldn't react the same if they had been given all the information.
I think the biggest thing back in the day was in 1961, when the criminal trial took place, we didn't know that society was not aware of the concept of false confessions.
True.
If you confessed, you did it. And we as a society now know that there is something called a wrongful confession or a coarse confession. People do it. It is a thing that we have proven can happen. And so in that context back then, people didn't understand that. But I think it's very interesting that even back in the day, they spared Chester Weger the death penalty.
Yes.
The state wanted to electrocute him. The state asked the jury to electrocute him. Think about that. He could have been electrocuted. The jury could have said, okay, yeah, we agree. And he would have been electrocuted, and this story would have never been told as robust as it's being told now.
Right.
It would have all been over. And I think the jury spared him because they had doubts. And we all knew from what we've read and heard, even the state's attorney's office felt the confession made no sense.
Right.
Nobody believed the story. It was a ridiculous confession. You've got this 21-year-old dishwasher who viciously massacres three women. There's no reason to beat these three women so brutally. And then you're going to go back to your job and just calmly go back to your job and continue to wash dishes, and there's no blood on you and nobody notices. I mean, it was ridiculous, and they all knew it.
Yeah. That's interesting. I just think that obviously that jury had doubts. And then if you had given them at the time, right, a testimony saying there were no scratches on him. Oh, by the way, the hair didn't match. By the way, this, by the way, that, right? The tree, the tree didn't match the dendrochronology report didn't match the branch. I mean, I really feel had just a few of these elements been in play in 1961, there would have been justice. And yet they weren't. And so here we are almost 65 years later.
I think if they would have heard back then, this is the thing. It was pre-Brady versus Maryland. So the state did not have an obligation to turn over exculpatory evidence. That hair result was done before trial, which the Washington University Medical School found it to be dissimilar. Now, that's not, like we have now where it's DNA, was not Chester. But if they'd have known, for instance, back then that hair on Francis Murphy was not Chester Weger, you kidding me? That would have been huge, because the state and I'm not going to let Will County move the goalposts here. The confession was a Chester Weger only confession. And so they can't come back now and try to say, oh, well, maybe he did it with other people. No,
right.
There's no evidence of that, and that's not what they were claiming, and that's not what the confession said. So if that hair on Francis Murphy is not Chester Weger's, tell me that's not a hugely powerful evidence, exculpatory, exonerating evidence. It is. Right. Absolutely.
Right. Well, I mean, if I had been on that jury in 1961 and I had just had that piece of information that, hey, hair on her glove didn't match, then I would immediately go, well, then the whole scenario doesn't make sense. That means there was somebody else there, which means that confession doesn't make sense. Well, now I'm confused. I can't convict. Right.
Yeah.
And I just any one of these things you can imagine would have changed the outcome.
And then when you take it a step farther, because I think the DNA, when we got the Bodie result, I think that alone was exonerating to me. To me, the case should have been over at that point. I think the case should have been dropped at that point. There was an argument, I think it wasn't very persuasive, but that, oh, well, maybe that hair came from somebody, let's say, who processed the crime scene, somebody who was there, like a police officer. Or, now, let's pause there. That really kind of never made any sense, because the reason we got a DNA result and a genetic genealogy result is because the hair had a root on it, which a hair that just falls out of your head, my understanding is, would not have a root on it. Okay, it's consistent with it being yanked out. But now, when they did the genetic genealogy and the hair came back to one of those three Bray brothers who have no connection to Chester Weger, who were local guys in the area, that for sure, to me, would have changed the trial result. Absolutely.
Especially if I had known that one of them was found dead the same day the women were found.
Yeah. And, absolutely. How weird is that? And if law enforcement would have known that, hey, this hair came back to one of the Bray brothers, there would have been an investigation, you would think, unless there's a lot of hanky-panky going on. If they really were, wasn't a big cover-up, they would have been looking at them. Now, in my opinion, there was a huge cover-up going on, because everything we know about the telephone operator, Lois Zelensek's memo, that's coming in too, Right. Will County's position, to be clear, and Will County's position during the briefing on the motion to dismiss is, Will County believes the confession. That's stunning to me. Will County believes the confession. That's their position. All the evidence I just summarized, they're not moved by any of that. They still believe the confession. The telephone operator memo, Will County takes issue with the fact that of what she heard. Did she really hear what she heard? Could she have been wrong? Was she even talking about the Starved Rock murders? It's nonsense. It's nonsense. I mean, nobody can read it that way. No fair person would read it that way. clearly, this is like within days of the murders. The first guy she reports says, boy, they sure had a big write-up on the murders in tonight's paper. Yeah, they're talking about the Starved Rock murders. And you know what? Those brothers never came out and said, we're talking about a different murder, a different pair of bloody clothes. No,
Yeah,
they just
right.
denied having the conversation, which is laughable.
I know. I mean, you'd think they have at least, in an effort to provide some plausibility, go, oh no, no, we were talking about those murders across town, or or something. Like they would have just kind of like tried to manipulate what they said, and instead they just went, nope, I don't know what you're talking about. Which to me feels so much like, again, if we're writing a screenplay for like guys that are in the know but just don't have any fear, just go, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know, right? It just feels like that.
Yeah, and then when the thing about her interview, there are so many hallmarks of credibility. First of all, just who she was. She was an operator. She was a president of that operators union. She was so traumatized, knowing that what she heard was confidential, but also knowing that it was so important that
Mm-hmm.
she really was conflicted, even was thinking about talking to her priest. And when she finally reported it to her neighbor, Gladys Brummel, the woman that I took a statement from, her husband was the Aurora police officer, said, you got to report this.
Mm-hmm.
She had all the detail, the accents, the way they talked, the vocabulary,
Yes.
the way she said they were talking about cars, not just the sale of a car, but something bigger, which is exactly right. Bill Palmatier owned car dealerships. She was spot on
Yeah.
in what she heard. And those guys talking about the Starved Rock murders, knowing that there's a guy with bloody overalls on the trunk of a car, which, by the way, it's exactly what Roy Tyson said. I mean, this lines up perfectly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Roy
Yeah.
Tyson, think about this, and we said this before, but I still get blown away by this. When Roy Tyson told me this story, I hadn't found that telephone operator memo. I wasn't aware of it.
No.
So he wasn't either. And in his story that he's telling me that Smokey told him, if you remember, right, really at the very end of it, Smokey didn't know what to do with the bloody clothes in the trunk of his car. And all right, so there was a lag time. The murders took place, and Smokey didn't know under Roy's story what to do with the bloody clothes. And then what Roy Tyson says is he winds up what? Burning them in the Bureau County burn pit, which is exactly consistent with what Lois Zelensik heard. At that point, a few days after the murders, the guy hasn't gotten rid of the bloody clothes in the trunk of a car. Uh, William Palmatier says burn them, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, it's just so consistent, and it's just so powerful. And then when you've got the interview of Glenn Palmatier, which we would only got from the Steve Stout documents, thank God
Right.
Steve Stout donated those documents to the LaSalle Historical Society. He tried to do it anonymously, but luckily I got a tip. I would never have known those documents were there. And we got the interview of Glenn Palmatier, where the Illinois State Police talk about doing surveillance in the bar and seeing him talking to Lupe Cardenas all the
Yeah.
time. Lupe Cardenas is a guy who they even said was a big burly guy. Sounds
Yeah.
exactly who Lois Zelensik is describing as having placed the call.
Right.
Got arrested in 1970 as part of a group of mob guys that hijacked a truck containing a bunch of silver. Got a 15-year prison sentence. That is one piece of evidence I thought we would win on. We submitted a newspaper article that talked about Lupe Cardenas's arrest for that hijacking. And, all the other guys that he was with were these mob guys. The court said all the newspaper articles were not new evidence because they could have been discovered earlier. I wrote in my response to the motion to dismiss, Chester Weger wasn't aware of Lupe Cardenas
Mm-hmm.
until we got the Steve Stout documents and got the Glenn Palmatier interview. So he couldn't have known about that to try to research it. But in any event, um, uh, I think the telephone operator memo is huge, huge evidence. all this collectively, it's just so powerful to me, Whitney. It's just so
You
powerful.
know, I know. I mean, it's you know what I love? I think it would be so fascinating if we could get a statistician on here to calculate the odds of all of these people telling narratives that line up so precisely. If they were just making it up, what would the statistical odds be of that possibility? I think they'd be so astronomically impossible, right? I mean, but I just, as we've been researching this, and as you've been laying out the facts here, every single piece fit,
Yeah.
right? Roy Tyson's statement, Lois Zelensky's report, facts that we were able to verify about what the Palmatier brothers did and who they associated with. I mean, the list goes on. And it's just when you look at it in its totality, it's just so evident. It is just so evident.
And there's so many other ones that we've talked about them, but there's so many other points. Like I could go on and on. For instance, that Exhibit 6, which was like the 2-page handwritten notes.
Yeah.
There was a meeting from the crime lab within, like the day or two after the murder.
Mm-hmm.
There were two types of twine used to bind the women, 10 strand and 20 strand. There was no 10 strand twine used by the lodge. They actually went to Chester Weger's house 8 months later, tried looking for twine. What'd they find? 12 strand twine, not
Yeah.
10, not 20. So, the twine had no connection to Chester or the lodge. And then we also noted from those notes that the twine was cut with two different types of knives, one that was serrated and one that was not. And then we have our forensic pathologist, David Fowler, who says that, there were different types of murder weapons used. There were a couple different types of injuries. Some were like a rounder kind of injury and some were
Mm-hmm.
pointed. The rounder type of injuries were, he said, consistent with something like a baseball bat. The pointed injuries, he said, were something like a tire iron. It's not, he said, the camera or the binoculars. Those could have caused superficial injuries, but they can't
Mm-hmm.
crush your skull.
Right.
What he said, it was a very hard object swung with force. And those notes also say the log wasn't the murder weapon because it
Mm-hmm.
says on there blood did not result from hitting. Somebody's head could have been resting on the log. Maybe some drops of blood got on the log. There's just so many things that point to several people, premeditation, also point to the Chicago Mafia. Just
Mm-hmm.
on and on and on. It's
I
just,
know.
it's just absolutely stunning. And like I say, I'm so excited to be able to present all this evidence in court, in open court, to present this all for the world to see.
What is the timeline for that now? I mean,
So
what is our
now,
timeline going forward?
yeah. So what happened, and maybe people read the transcript, and I'll post the transcript from the court hearing when I get it. The way it works in legal cases, I filed a post-conviction petition. Will County brought a motion to dismiss that petition legally, which the court basically denied. So now Will County has to file an answer to my petition. What that means is they have to go allegation by allegation and either admit the allegations I make, deny the allegations I make, or say they don't have sufficient knowledge to admit or deny. They've got 45 days to do that, 45 days from Friday. So it goes to January 7th to file their answer. That's just kind of a formality. They'll file their answer. They will deny all the key allegations.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a status hearing January 24th, 2025, January 24th, at which time the court will set a date for this evidentiary hearing. I am hoping to get a date as soon as we can. I'm hoping to get a date in February, and if not February, in March. Like I want to do it as soon as we
Yeah.
can. And once that gets set, then that's when we'll show up and do it all. Um, it's incredible. It's just, what a giant step forward we took on Friday. Just huge.
Can you imagine? I mean, if you could get that scheduled for February, I mean, 65 years, 65-year anniversary of
Yeah.
this. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
think of any other story that's even remotely close to this in
No.
scope and time span.
Yeah. There was one other piece of evidence I was hoping to get to the third stage that the court denied, which was our false confessions expert.
Mm.
And the court had said in the opinion something like, well, Chester had kind of challenged that issue at trial. Our expert was a guy named Dr. Brian Cutler, and he has actually testified before at third stage evidentiary hearings. He's been allowed.
Mhm.
And, my view on this was he's basing it on science that's new, studies that are new, research that's new. So it is new evidence, because I think it would be very important for a jury to hear evidence of what are the factors that
Mhm.
cause false confessions. And, he would walk through those factors. They're all present here. Somebody's, it's age, it's low education, it's
Mhm.
threats of death or great bodily harm. All those things were present here. I mean, Chester Weger has said he was trying to save his life.
Right.
He was trying to save his life. And I thought that evidence was really powerful and important. But I'm not complaining. I'm grateful. I thought the court did a very thorough, job in going through everything. I appreciate all the time the court has taken on this. We have plenty of really good stuff that we're going to put into evidence. It's powerful. It's powerful stuff. And one more step. We are close. We are close. I feel
No.
like we're first and goal at 10-yard line.
Oh,
We
yeah.
we got to do our job and finish strong.
Yeah. I mean, it's this is one of those Thanksgivings to be extra thankful on, I mean, just to know that there's a path forward here heading into the new year, and hope for justice. I mean, it's just that I'm actually really emotional about it, just because I think I had let myself start to I had let pessimism and cynicism about the state of the world kind of seep into my mind, and just go, oh, maybe it's not going to work, maybe it's not going to work. And then when I obviously talked to you, it was just sort of this ray of light pierced through the clouds, and I'm
Yeah.
so happy.
And we had that kind of lull there, so there was
Yeah,
we were in a holding pattern. And I felt, though, driving out there, as much as I understood, the significance of what could or could not
mhm,
happen, when I was preparing for the hearing and rereading everything, it just reminded me how strong our evidence was. It's not like we have one thing. It's not like we just have a DNA
sure,
result. We have so many things that corroborate Chester Weger's innocence. So many things, so many people, so much evidence, even forensic evidence, that I was like, wow, this is just, it's a very strong case in my opinion, And
yeah.
like I said, this is what we were hoping to do. We were hoping to get the opportunity to present all this evidence in court. And now we're
It's
going
gonna
to get a chance
happen.
to do that. It's going to happen. It is real, Whitney. It
I'm
is real.
I'm I'm coming. I'm gonna be there. It's
That'll
happening.
be amazing.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
It would be amazing to have you there. And, I'm just so blessed to have met Chester Weger and his family. It
Yeah.
has really changed my life. Blessed and honored that I met that whole family, what they've been through. And I think back, I've told this story before. I'll tell it one more time. It's like Chester gets convicted in 1961, and someone walks into his cell and says, "Hey, don't worry about it. There's a lawyer who's going to be your champion. He's going to take up your case." Bad news is he's not born yet. He's going to be born next year. He's got to go to kindergarten. He's got to go to elementary school, junior high. He's got to go to high school. He's got to go to law school. He's got to work as a lawyer for like 30 years. And then he's finally going to hear about your case. And then when he hears about your case, it's going to take another 7 years to finally
Right.
get to an evidentiary hearing. But you know what? Hang tight, man. I mean, like, we're going to get there. Like, can you imagine?
It's the ultimate, I've said this before, it's the ultimate act of resistance, surviving. He's just kept surviving and holding on. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's the most astounding and impressive act of resistance I've ever seen from a person, to just say, I'm not letting go, I'm not giving up, I'm just gonna hold on until the truth comes out.
Yeah. I mean, it is incredibly inspirational incredibly inspirational and also incredibly sad, you know.
It is, yeah.
But I'm really thrilled for Chester and his family to get this opportunity. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. The job is not done. I think it was a famous Kobe Bryant quote. I think they won like, I don't know, one or two games in the NBA finals. And he's like, job's not done. You know,
Yeah.
job's not done. We got more work to do. It's going to be a lot of effort to put
Mhm.
all this evidence on at an evidentiary hearing. So it's going to be, you know, roll up the sleeves between now and early next year. But I am so looking forward to it.
I am too. I mean, this is 65 years in the making, you know.
I can't
It's
wait.
time.
Well, you know what? I've got a couple of ideas for podcasts that maybe, you know, we can talk about some other things while we're waiting for this hearing to get scheduled. I'll circle back with you about that. So listeners out there, stay tuned. We might have some more episodes that talk about some other issues. I hope to get this episode up, you know, soon. I'll post the court's order. Once I get a transcript from the hearing, I'll post that. We did have, you know, people in court. I want to just everybody out there who has reached out to me, supported Chester and me and our mission. I want to thank you really from the bottom of our hearts. It means so much. It's so motivating to have that energy behind us. And Whitney, it has been such a journey with you. We could have never, ever thought we'd have so many episodes of this podcast. I think we started it thinking,
Ever.
you know, we'll record a few episodes and kind of see where it goes. Who could have thought it would have been years and dozens of episodes later? I mean, the twists and the turns. You and I couldn't have scripted this.
No, no, I think, you know, 6 years ago, the first time you told me about this case, and you said, hey, you know, you should look into this. It's pretty interesting. I'd like to know your thoughts. I could have never imagined that it would explode into this saga of intrigue and so many players and, you know, elements of conspiracy and I mean, it just I sitting here today, I cannot believe that we are this close. You know, it's just it's mind blowing.
Knocking on the door of justice, knock,
Right.
knock, and I can taste it. I can taste it, but I know how much work is left to do. We have
Right.
a lot of hard work ahead of us, but we're highly motivated, and I'm looking forward to it. And I can't wait, and I can't wait to get back here with you, Whitney, real
Same.
soon. So
Same.
thank you for
Same.
joining me, and thank you for everybody out there. Stay tuned. More to come.